My eyes were trying desperately to focus on the screen, but the letters kept blurring together like someone had poured water across the glass. I pressed my trembling fingers against the keyboard, feeling that bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning humming steadily overhead. The fever had started this morning, maybe even last night if I was being honest with myself. But I couldn't leave. This wasn't just a job. This was my last lifeline, the only thing standing between me and complete financial collapse. "Jodie, is that file ready?" The voice came from behind my cubicle, sharp, precise, utterly devoid of warmth. Cade Harlow, Chief Financial Officer, Alpha. The man I'd been carefully avoiding for 4 months because a single glance from him could strip away every defense I'd built. His presence alone had this weight to it, this gravitational pull that made me feel impossibly small and exposed. I nodded without turning around, not wanting him to see the pallor I knew was spreading across my face. "Almost finished. Almost doesn't cut it here." His footsteps approached, controlled, measured, each one a calculated decision. Then his scent hit me. Cedar wood and smoke. That sharp aftertaste of dominance that made every omega instinct in my body want to curl inward. My muscles locked up automatically, my body responding before my mind could catch up. I tried to suppress the cough building in my throat, but the tickle was too insistent. It escaped, harsh and revealing. Mistake. Terrible mistake. Because now he was right beside my desk, and when his hand settled on my shoulder, I froze completely. The touch was gentle but unmistakably firm, like he was confirming I was actually real, actually here. "You're not okay." It wasn't a question, it was a statement delivered with such certainty that arguing felt pointless. "I'm fine," I managed, but my voice cracked on the second word, and with that crack went any credibility my denial might have had. His gaze dropped to my laptop screen, probably checking my work before he reached over and smoothly closed it. Just like that. "Conference room." Now, I stood up, but my legs were so weak I had to grip the edge of the desk for support. Cade noticed. I could see it in his eyes, that flicker of concern he quickly masked, but he didn't comment. He just started walking, and I knew I had no choice but to follow. The walk to the conference room felt endless. Every step made my head spin worse, the fluorescent lights above becoming painful to look at. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead despite the chills racking my body. The hallway seemed to stretch and contract with each breath I took, and I focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on not collapsing right here where everyone could see. When we finally reached the room, Cade held the door open and waited for me to enter first. The moment it clicked shut behind us, he locked it and pulled down the blinds in one fluid motion. I stood there trembling, not just from the fever but from the sudden realization that there was no escape now. The room felt smaller than it should, the walls closing in. "Sit." The command was quiet but absolute. I sank into the nearest chair, my legs giving out more than obeying. The leather was cool against my burning skin, offering a moment of relief that made me realize just how high my temperature had climbed. Cade moved in front of me and crouched down, bringing himself to eye level. This close I could hear his breathing, slow, controlled, completely steady while mine was shallow and rapid. "Your scent's different. This isn't just exhaustion, Jodie. How high is your fever?" I dropped my gaze to my lap, unable to meet those intense eyes. "I don't know exactly. Don't lie to me." He reached for my hand, and I couldn't stop the sharp intake of breath when his naturally cool fingers touched my burning skin. The contrast was so stark it almost hurt. Cade paused, surprise crossing his features before he wrapped both hands around mine, carefully assessing. Then he flipped my wrist over and pressed 2 fingers to my pulse point. Professional. Clinical. Except for the concern bleeding through despite his best efforts. "You're burning up," he whispered, and there was no anger in it, just worry. Maybe even fear. "Cade, please, I need this job. I'm okay. I can work." "Stop." One word. But it carried such weight that my mouth snapped shut, my throat constricting. He stood and removed his blazer with deliberate care, then draped it over my shoulders. The fabric still held his body heat and was saturated with his scent. "You're going home. Right now. This isn't up for debate." "I can't go home," I said, and this time I couldn't keep the fear out of my voice. "If I leave today, it'll count against my attendance. I can't afford another warning, Cade. I need this job." Because I stopped, swallowing hard. Because I don't have a backup plan. Several long seconds passed. He just watched me. Really watched me. Like he was reading every thought I'd ever tried to hide. Then he did something I never expected. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Maintaining eye contact the entire time. Human resources? This is Cade Harlow. Mark Jodie Marsh down for paid sick leave today. Also remove any attendance warnings from his record. Consider this direct authorization from the CEO level. I stared at him, shock washing over me in waves. Confused. Relieved. And maybe for the first time in months, protected. My chest tightened with an emotion I couldn't quite name. He ended the call and looked at me again. You think I'd let you risk your health to finish a report? Not happening. Let's go. I wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some shred of independence. But the truth was I barely had the strength to stand. When Cade offered his hand, I took it, letting him pull me to my feet. His blazer slipped slightly, and he adjusted it carefully, making sure it covered my shoulders completely. Can you walk? He asked quietly. I think so. Good. My car's in the executive parking level. He picked up my bag from where I'd left it by my desk, slinging it over his own shoulder like it weighed nothing. We're leaving through the side exit. Fewer people. The consideration in that small detail, protecting me from curious stares, from office gossip, made something in my chest crack open. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and let him guide me toward the elevators. As we walked, his hand hovered near my elbow, not quite touching but ready to catch me if I stumbled. And despite the fever, despite the fear, despite everything, I felt safer than I had in months. The elevator ride down felt surreal. I leaned against the wall, Cade's blazer wrapped around me like armor. Watching the numbers descend, he stood nearby, close enough that I could reach for him if needed, but far enough to give me space. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? He just used executive authority to protect my job, and I still didn't understand why. When we reached his car, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than I'd make in 3 years, he opened the passenger door and waited while I lowered myself carefully into the seat. The leather was cool and smooth, the interior immaculate. It smelled like him, that cedar and smoke combination that was becoming dangerously familiar. He slid into the driver's seat and started the engine without a word. The silence between us felt heavy with unspoken things as we pulled out of the parking garage and merged into afternoon traffic. I stared out the window, watching the city blur past, trying to make sense of what was happening. Do you have anyone at home? His voice broke the quiet. Roommate? Family nearby? No, I answered softly. I live alone. Could never afford to split rent with someone and still make ends meet. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles going white for just a moment before he relaxed them again. So nobody's there to take care of you today. I can take care of myself, I said. But we both knew it was a lie. My voice lacked any real conviction. We stopped at a red light, and he turned to look at me properly. When did the fever start? There was no point in lying anymore. Last night, I think. It wasn't bad then, so I thought I could push through, and it got worse. Not a question. He already knew the answer. I could hear frustration in his tone. But it wasn't directed at me, it was aimed inward. Did you take anything for it? I shook my head. Nothing at home. I was going to pick something up this weekend. He didn't respond verbally, but his jaw tightened like he was physically restraining himself from saying what he really thought. The light changed, and we continued driving. When we pulled up outside my apartment building, a worn structure in a neighborhood that had seen better days, he turned off the engine and got out before I could protest. By the time I managed to open my door, he was already there, hand extended to help me up. Cade, seriously. I can handle it from here. Keys. The single word was a command. Gentle but absolute. I fumbled in my pocket and handed them over because arguing required energy I didn't have. He took them, picked up my bag from the back seat, and guided me toward the entrance with one hand hovering at my elbow. The stairs to my second-floor unit felt like climbing a mountain. Halfway up, my vision started to tunnel, and I must have swayed because suddenly Cade's arm was around my waist, taking most of my weight. Easy, he murmured. One step at a time. We made it to my door and he unlocked it with steady hands while keeping me upright. The apartment was small, barely more than a studio with a separate bedroom, but it was clean and organized because that was one thing I could control in my chaotic life. He steered me directly to the bedroom and sat me on the edge of the bed. Then he disappeared and I heard him in the kitchen, running water, opening cabinets. He returned with a glass and an expression that had shifted from concern to genuinely troubled. "You don't have any medicine," he said flatly. "I usually don't get sick," I whispered. Didn't see the point in keeping anything on hand. Cade set the water on the nightstand and crouched in front of me again, bringing us eye to eye. Then he did something that completely undid me. He reached out and pressed his palm to my forehead, skin to skin. No hesitation. The coolness of his touch against my burning skin was shocking. But what really got me was the tenderness in the gesture. Nobody had touched me like this in so long. Like I'd eyed, like my well-being was important. "You're staying in this bed," he said firmly. "Don't move." "I mean it, Jodie. Not even to the bathroom unless absolutely necessary. But no arguments. I'm going to get supplies, and I'll be back within the hour. Can you manage that long alone?" I wanted to tell him he didn't need to come back, that I'd be fine, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just nodded. He stood, looking torn about leaving. Then he grabbed the throw blanket from my couch on his way out and brought it back, draping it over my lap. "Drink that water. All of it." The door closed softly behind him and I was alone with the realization that Cade Harlow, CFO Alpha, the man I'd been avoiding, had just taken care of me with more gentleness than anyone had shown me in years. I picked up the water glass with shaking hands and drank, tasting nothing, feeling everything. True to his word, he returned in under an hour. I heard his key in the lock when had I given him permission to keep my keys, and then he was back, carrying multiple shopping bags that he set on my small kitchen counter. "Pharmacy didn't have everything I wanted, so I went to 2, he explained. "Already unpacking. Fever reducer, pain reliever, electrolyte drinks, soup, crackers, tissues, and a digital thermometer, because you definitely don't own one." I watched from the bedroom doorway, wrapped in his blazer and my blanket, as he organized everything with military efficiency. "You didn't have to do all this." He paused, a bottle of medicine in his hand, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Get back in bed before you fall over." I obeyed because standing was taking more effort than I wanted to admit. He followed me in, medicine and water in hand, and watched while I took the pills he'd selected. Then he pulled out the thermometer. "Under your tongue. Don't talk." The reading came back at 102.8 degrees. Katie's expression darkened. "That's hospital level," I started to say. "It's close, but we can bring it down here. I'm staying." He said it like it was already decided, like I had no say in the matter. "Where do you keep extra bedding?" "I'll take the couch." "Cade, you can't just watch me." He was already heading for my linen closet, and I realized with absolute certainty that arguing was pointless. Cade Harlow had made up his mind, and when an alpha decided something, especially about protecting someone they cared about, wait, did he care about me? The thought was too big, too overwhelming to process while fever was melting my brain. So I lay back against my pillows and let him take control. Just this once. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, Cade was gently shaking my shoulder, a bowl of soup in his other hand. The apartment smelled different, warm, savory, like actual food instead of the usual microwave meals I survived on. "You need to eat something before the medicine kicks in fully," he said. His tone left no room for argument, but it wasn't harsh. It was careful, measured, like he was worried about pushing too hard. I struggled to sit up, and he immediately adjusted the pillows behind me, creating a nest of support. Then he sat on the edge of the bed, not too close, respecting boundaries even in this intimate situation, and held out the bowl. My hands were shaking too badly to take it. We both realized it at the same time. I saw the moment his expression shifted, saw him make a decision. "Let me," he said quietly, and before I could protest, he'd scooped up a spoonful and brought it to my lips. The humiliation burned hotter than the fever. "I'm not a child." "I know you're not." He waited patiently, the spoon steady in his hand. "But you're also barely conscious, and you need nutrients. Please, Jodie. Let me help." There was something in his voice, not pity, not condescension, but genuine concern. So I opened my mouth and let him feed me, one careful spoonful at a time. He moved slowly, giving me time to chew and swallow, never rush. Between bites, he'd set the bowl aside and hold the electrolyte drink for me. A sip from the straw, he'd thoughtfully added, "Why are you doing this?" I finally asked when the bowl was half empty and I couldn't stand the question burning in my chest any longer. Cade set the soup down on the nightstand and wiped the corner of my mouth with a napkin. Such a simple gesture that it made my throat tight. Because you need help and there's nobody else here to give it. That's not a real answer. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like he was trying to decide how much to reveal. You really don't see it, do you? See what? How you are at the office. How you give away your lunch to the new interns who can't afford the cafeteria prices. How you stay late to cover for people who have families to get home to. How you make yourself invisible even though you're one of the most competent people in that building. His voice dropped lower. How you suppress your scent until you barely register as an omega because you think it makes you safer. I couldn't breathe. He'd noticed all of that? I'd been so careful, so deliberate about flying under the radar. I notice you, Jodie, he continued. I've noticed you since your first day when you were so nervous in that interview you kept adjusting your tie every 30 seconds. I've watched you survive in an environment that doesn't make it easy for omegas, especially ones without family connections or wealth to fall back on. I've seen your strength. I'm not strong, I whispered. I'm barely holding on. Strength isn't about never struggling. It's about getting up every day and trying anyway. He picked up the soup bowl again. Finish this. Then you're taking more medicine and sleeping. I obeyed mechanically, my mind spinning. Cade had been watching me for months. And instead of seeing weakness, he'd seen something worth protecting. The thought was too big, too impossible to fully process. When the soup was gone, he took the bowl to the kitchen and returned with more pills and fresh water. I swallowed them dutifully, then lay back down. The fever medicine from earlier was starting to work. I could feel the edge coming off the worst of the heat, though I was still burning up. Your sheets are soaked, Cade observed, touching the pillow beside my head. Do you have clean bedding? Linen closet. But I can change them later. You'll do no such thing. He was already moving, pulling open the closet and finding fresh sheets with surprising efficiency. Sit in the chair for a minute. I relocated to my reading chair in the corner, wrapped in the throw blanket, and watched in amazement as Cade Harlow, a man who probably had housekeeping staff at his own home, stripped my bed and remade it with clean sheets. He worked quickly, corners crisp and professional, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Back in bed, he ordered when he finished and I complied without thinking. The fresh sheets were cool and dry against my skin, and I nearly moaned with relief. Cade pulled the blanket up to my shoulders, then did something that stopped my heart. He brushed the damp hair back from my forehead, his touch feather-light. Sleep now. I'll be right outside if you need anything. You're really staying? I couldn't quite believe it. Did you think I'd leave you alone with a fever this high? He looked almost offended by the suggestion. I'm staying. We can argue about it when you're well enough to form coherent arguments. Right now, you're sleeping. I wanted to protest to maintain some dignity, but exhaustion was pulling me under like a riptide. My eyes were already closing when I felt him adjust the blanket one more time, tucking it around me with surprising gentleness. Cade? My voice was barely a whisper. Yes, thank you. There was a pause. Then I felt the ghost of his fingers against my hand where it rested on top of the blanket. You don't have to thank me for basic human decency, Jodie. Now sleep. I drifted off with the sound of him moving around my apartment, quiet, careful, respecting my space even as he took care of it. The last coherent thought I had was that I felt safer than I had in years, and that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to face everything alone anymore. When I woke briefly in the night, disoriented and overheated, I found a fresh glass of water on the nightstand and a note in sharp, precise handwriting. Drink this. More medicine in 2 hours. I'm on the couch. I drank the water, set the glass down carefully, and looked toward my closed bedroom door. Beyond it, an alpha was sleeping on my uncomfortable couch, staying awake to check on me, giving up his own comfort to ensure mine. And despite the fever still raging through my system, despite all the logical reasons this didn't make sense, I felt something shift in my chest. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. I fell back asleep with that feeling warming me from the inside out. More effective than any medicine could ever be. I woke sometime in the early hours of morning, my mouth dry as sandpaper, and my body drenched in sweat. The fever had broken during the night, leaving me weak but clear-headed for the first time in what felt like days. Moonlight filtered through my bedroom curtains, casting silver shadows across the room, and in that dim light I could make out a figure slumped in the chair beside my bed. Cade, He was asleep, or trying to be. His tall frame folded awkwardly into my reading chair, one hand still resting on the edge of my mattress like he'd been monitoring me even in sleep. His tie was loosened, the top button of his shirt undone, and there were dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. He looked exhausted, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen him at the office, where he was always composed, always in control. I tried to sit up quietly, not wanting to wake him, but the movement must have been enough, because his eyes opened immediately, alert despite having just been sleeping. "How do you feel?" His voice was rough with sleep, but concerned, and he was already reaching for my forehead to check my temperature. "Better," I whispered. "The fever broke. You can go home now, get some real sleep." He checked his watch, 3:47 in the morning, and shook his head. "A few more hours won't hurt. I want to make sure it doesn't spike again." "Cade, you've done more than enough. I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm choosing." He stood and stretched, his joints popping audibly. "Are you thirsty? Hungry?" Now that he mentioned it, I was both. "Maybe some water?" He disappeared into the kitchen, and I heard him moving around, opening cabinets. He returned with not just water but also crackers and a banana. Easy foods that wouldn't upset my stomach. He'd thought of everything. "Small bites," he instructed, watching as I fumbled with the cracker wrapper. My hands were still weak, trembling slightly, and when I struggled with the plastic, he took it from me and opened it without comment, placing a cracker directly in my palm. We sat in comfortable silence while I ate, him watching to make sure I kept the food down, me trying to process the surreal reality of having Cade Harlow in my bedroom at 4 in the morning, caring for me like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Can I ask you something?" I ventured after finishing the banana. "Anything. Why do you keep your distance at work? From everyone, I mean. You're always professional, always controlled, but never personal." He was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "My father was CEO of a major corporation. He taught me early that showing emotion in business is weakness, that attachments make you vulnerable. I learned to compartmentalize, to keep walls up." He paused, his gaze intense. "But then you started working there, and I found myself wanting to break every rule I'd ever made." My heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I noticed everything about you, Jodie. The way you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating, how you always take the stairs instead of the elevator, even when you're carrying heavy boxes, the fact that you eat lunch at your desk because you're saving money, but you'll still buy coffee for the intern who looks tired." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I noticed, and I wanted to know more. But I also knew that pursuing you would put you in an impossible position. An Omega getting involved with a senior executive. People would talk. They'd assume the worst. So you stayed away." "I tried to." A wry smile crossed his face. "Obviously I failed spectacularly yesterday when I saw you struggling." "I'm glad you failed," I admitted softly. His expression shifted to something warm and open. "So am I." The conversation lulled and my eyelids grew heavy again. Cade noticed immediately. "Back to sleep. Your body needs rest to finish healing. Will you still be here when I wake up?" "Do you want me to be?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Then I'll be here." He adjusted my blanket, his movements careful and practiced. "Sleep, Jodie. I've got you." And surrounded by his scent, feeling safer than I had in years, I let myself drift off again. When I woke the second time, proper morning sunlight was streaming through the windows and the apartment smelled like coffee and something sweet. I sat up slowly, testing my strength, and found that, while I was still tired, the bone-deep exhaustion had faded. The fever was genuinely gone. I made my way to the bathroom, steadying myself against the wall, and caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked terrible, hair sticking up at odd angles, eyes still bloodshot, 2 days' worth of stubble darkening my jaw. But I also looked alive, which was an improvement. When I emerged, Cade was in the kitchen and I stopped in the doorway to watch him. He'd somehow found my waffle maker, buried in the back of a cabinet I rarely used, and was saying breakfast. He moved with surprising comfort in my small space, like he'd been doing this for years instead of hours. "You found my waffle maker," I said, announcing my presence. He turned and his face lit up with a smile that transformed his usually serious features. "You're up, and you look human again." "That's generous." I moved to the small dining table and sat, still not entirely steady on my feet. He plated a waffle, added butter and syrup with careful precision, and brought it to me along with a cup of coffee, which I noticed was prepared exactly how I liked it. "How did you know?" I asked, gesturing to the coffee. "I pay attention." He sat across from me with his own cup. "You always make it the same way in the office break room. Light on the milk, no sugar." The fact that he'd observed something so mundane, so small, made my chest tight with emotion I didn't know how to name. "You really do notice everything. When it comes to you." "Yes." There was no embarrassment in his admission, just simple honesty. I ate slowly, letting the food settle, while he sipped his coffee and watched me with those intense eyes. Finally, I couldn't stand the weight of everything unsaid anymore. "What happens now? What do you want to happen?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to pretend yesterday never occurred, go back to normal. But another part," I trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Another part wants to see where this could go," he finished for me. "If we didn't have jobs to worry about, office politics, the whole alpha-omega dynamic that makes everything complicated." "Exactly." Cade set down his coffee and reached across the table, palm up, an invitation, not a demand. I placed my hand in his and his fingers closed around mine, warm and solid. "Here's what I propose. We take this slow. We get to know each other outside of work, see if this connection is real, or just adrenaline from a crisis situation. No pressure, no expectations, just possibility. And at work, we stay professional. Keep our private lives private until we're both sure about what this is." He squeezed my hand gently. "I won't put you in a position where people can question your competence or your ethics. Your career matters, and I won't jeopardize it." Relief flooded through me. "You'd really do that? Keep things quiet even though it means hiding? For you?" "Yes." His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand, a soothing gesture that sent pleasant shivers up my arm. "I've spent years building walls, Jodie. I can maintain them a little longer if it means protecting you." We sat like that for a while, hands linked across my small kitchen table, something new and fragile growing between us. Eventually Cade glanced at his watch and sighed. "I should go home, shower, change. I have a board meeting at 11. Disappointment stabbed through me, but I nodded. "Of course. Thank you for everything, the medicine, the food, staying with me. I don't know how to repay you." "Don't." He stood but didn't release my hand. "This wasn't a transaction, Jodie. I wanted to be here." He gathered his things, jacket, keys, phone, while I walked him to the door, still feeling unsteady but determined to see him off properly. At the threshold he paused and turned back to me. "Take today off too. Rest properly. I'll handle any questions at the office." "Cade, please." His hand came up to cup my cheek, the gesture so tender it made my breath catch. "Let me take care of this one thing." I nodded, leaning into his touch despite myself. We stood like that for a heartbeat, then two, the air between us charged with possibility. For a moment I thought he might kiss me, and I wasn't sure if I wanted him to or if it was too soon, too fast. But he just smiled, soft and private, meant only for me, and stepped back. "I'll text you later. Check in, make sure you're eating and resting." "You don't have to." "I want to." And with that, he was gone, leaving me alone in my apartment with the lingering scent of cedar wood and the feeling that my entire life had just shifted on its axis. I touched my cheek where his hand had been and smiled despite myself. Whatever was happening between us, whatever this was becoming, I wanted to find out. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was looking forward to tomorrow. 3 days later, I was back at work, fully recovered and trying very hard to act like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Cade and I texted constantly, casual conversations about work, books, random observations that made me laugh. He was witty in a dry, understated way that I found endlessly charming, and our messages had become the highlight of my days. On Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed during my lunch break. "Cade, dinner tomorrow. There's a new Italian place downtown I've been wanting to try." My heart jumped. This was it, our first official date. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on, "Sounds perfect. What time?" "Cade, I'll pick you up at 7. Wear something comfortable." Friday crawled by with agonizing slowness. I second-guessed my outfit choice approximately 17 times before settling on dark jeans and a navy button-down, casual but nice, hopefully striking the right balance. When 7 o'clock arrived and my doorbell rang, my hands were actually shaking as I opened it. Cade stood there in slacks, and a charcoal sweater that made his eyes look even more intense than usual. He ditched the corporate armor for something softer, more approachable, and it suited him. "You great," he said, his gaze warm with appreciation. "So do you," I managed, trying not to stare. The restaurant was intimate, with low lighting and small tables that encouraged conversation. Cade had reserved a corner booth, private enough that we could talk without being overheard. A waiter appeared immediately, and I realized this was the kind of place where they recognized Cade, where he probably brought important clients. "You come here often?" I asked after we'd ordered. "First time, actually. I usually avoid restaurants where I might run into business associates." He leaned back, completely relaxed in a way I'd never seen him at the office. "Tonight I wanted somewhere special." We talked easily, the conversation flowing naturally from work to childhood to dreams we'd never shared with anyone. I learned that Cade had wanted to be an architect before family pressure pushed him toward business. That he played piano when he was stressed. That he'd traveled to 32 countries but had never been to the Grand Canyon. "What about you?" he asked over dessert, tiramisu. We were sharing because he'd insisted I had to try it. "What did you want to be before life got in the way?" I hesitated, the old shame rising up. "A teacher. Elementary school. I loved working with kids during my college volunteer hours. I pushed chocolate around my plate. But teaching doesn't pay enough to handle my student loans, so I went into corporate work instead." "Do you regret it?" "Sometimes. But I'm good at what I do now, and stability matters when you're on your own." I met his eyes. "What about you?" "Regret? Every day I spent pretending I didn't want to know you better." The admission was quiet but weighty. 4 months of watching you from across the office, convincing myself it was inappropriate, that I was being professional. 4 months wasted. "Not wasted," I countered. "We're here now." His smile was slow and devastating. "We are." After dinner he drove me home but parked instead of just dropping me off. We sat in his car, the engine off, streetlights casting orange glows across his face. Neither of us moved to get out. "I had a really good time tonight," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Good enough for a second date?" "Definitely." He reached over and took my hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns across my knuckles. "I want to be honest about something. I know we agreed to take this slow, to see where it goes. But I need you to know, I'm already sure. About you. About this. I just don't want to rush you or make you uncomfortable." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "I'm sure too," I whispered. "I have been since you stayed with me through the fever. But honestly, probably before that. Probably since you noticed me at all." He lifted my hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to my knuckles. Old-fashioned, romantic, perfect. Then we're on the same page. We sat like that for a while longer, just holding hands in his car like teenagers, neither of us wanting the night to end. Eventually, though, reality intruded in the form of my neighbor's barking dog, and we both laughed. "I should let you go," Cade said reluctantly. "Early morning tomorrow." I nodded but didn't move. "Thank you for tonight, for everything." The pleasure was entirely mine. He squeezed my hand once more, then released it. "Text me when you're inside safely." "You're going to wait until I text?" "Every time," he promised. I got out of the car, walked to my building, and turned to wave before going inside. He was still there, watching, making sure I was safe. My phone buzzed before I'd even reached my apartment. "Cade, already missing you. Sleep well, Jodie." I fell asleep smiling, my phone clutched in my hand, feeling like maybe, just maybe, I'd found something real. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of secret smiles across the office and late-night phone calls that lasted hours. We went on 3 more dates, a movie, a museum visit, a walk through the botanical gardens where Cade admitted he couldn't keep plants alive to save his life. Each date ended the same way, him walking me to my door, a lingering goodbye, and that careful distance he maintained because he was letting me set the pace. At work we were scrupulously professional. No one suspected anything, which was exactly what I'd wanted. But it was getting harder to maintain the charade, especially when I'd catch him looking at me during meetings with an expression that made my pulse race. Then came the Monday that changed everything. I'd submitted a major project report, weeks of work culminating in a comprehensive analysis of our department's efficiency metrics. I was proud of it, confident in my findings. So when my manager Peterson called a meeting to review it publicly, I wasn't worried. I should have been. Peterson had a reputation for being difficult, but I'd never been on the receiving end of his temper. Apparently that was about to change. The meeting started normally enough, with him pulling up my report on the conference room screen. Then his expression darkened. "This is what you consider acceptable work, Marsh?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the room's ambient noise. I blinked, confused. "I followed all the parameters you outlined, sir. The data is verified and—" "Don't interrupt me." He slammed his hand on the table, making several people jump. "This is sloppy, incomplete, and frankly embarrassing. I don't know what you were thinking, but this doesn't meet even basic standards." Heat flooded my face as every eye in the room turned to me. "With respect, sir, I triple-checked everything. If there's a specific issue you'd like me to address, the specific issue is your incompetence." Peterson was shouting now, his face red. "Maybe you're not cut out for this level of work. Maybe we made a mistake hiring you in the first place." The words hit like physical blows. My throat tightened and I felt my sense suppressors weakening under the stress. Vanilla and anxiety starting to leak through. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but nothing came out. That's when I saw Cade through the glass wall. He was walking past the conference room, probably heading to his own meeting, but he stopped mid-stride when he saw what was happening. I watched his expression shift from curious to concerned to absolutely furious in the span of seconds. His body language changed completely. Shoulders squaring, jaw tightening, every inch of him radiating barely contained rage. He changed direction, heading straight for our conference room, and I knew with absolute certainty that everything was about to change. Cade knocked once, sharp and authoritative, before opening the conference room door. The room fell silent immediately, everyone recognizing the power dynamics at play. Peterson's mouth snapped shut mid-rant, his expression shifting from anger to uncertainty as he registered who had just interrupted. "Excuse me," Cade said, his voice perfectly calm but carrying an edge that made the hair on my neck stand up. "I couldn't help but overhear this discussion. May I?" He didn't wait for permission. He walked directly to me, picked up my report, and began reading. The silence was suffocating as everyone watched him scan page after page with practiced efficiency. I could feel Peterson's nervousness growing with each passing second. Finally, Cade looked up. "This report is exemplary. The data analysis is thorough, the conclusions are well supported, and the recommendations are both practical and innovative." His gaze locked onto Peterson. "In fact, this is some of the best work I've seen from this department in months. So I'm very curious to understand your criticisms." Peterson sputtered. "Well, the formatting wasn't. The formatting follows company guidelines to the letter." Cade's tone could have cut glass. "What else?" "Some of the data seemed questionable. Every number in this report can be verified against our internal systems, which I know because I helped design those systems." Cade set the report down carefully. "Mr. Peterson, if you have legitimate concerns about an employee's performance, you're welcome to discuss them professionally. But what I just witnessed wasn't professional feedback. It was a personal attack. Would you like to explain why?" The room was frozen. No one even seemed to be breathing. Peterson's face had gone from red to pale, and he was clearly scrambling for a response. "I just meant that there's always room for improvement. Then next time I suggest you focus on constructive criticism rather than humiliation." Katie's eyes swept the room. "This meeting is over. Everyone back to work." People scattered immediately, grateful for the escape. I started gathering my things, hands shaking from adrenaline, when Cade's hand touched my shoulder. Brief, grounding. "My office. 5 minutes." It was said quietly enough that no one else heard, but I nodded. I took those 5 minutes to compose myself in the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face and forcing my breathing to steady. When I knocked on Cade's office door, his assistant waved me in without question. He was standing by the window, looking out at the city, and he didn't turn when I entered. "Close the door." I did, and the click seemed impossibly loud. "Cade, I don't know what to say. Thank you for defending me, but now people are going to wonder." "Let them wonder." He finally turned, and the intensity in his expression stole my breath. "I'm done pretending, Jodie. I'm done watching people disrespect you and not being able to do anything about it. I'm done hiding what you mean to me." My heart stopped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't care who knows anymore." He crossed to me in 3 long strides. "I care about you. More than professional appearances, more than office politics, more than any of it. And I will not stand by while someone treats you like you're disposable. But my career, people will think I'm sleeping my way up." Anyone who knows your work knows that's impossible. You're brilliant, dedicated, and you've earned every bit of recognition you've received. His hands came up to frame my face, and if anyone suggests otherwise, they'll answer to me. Tears pricked my eyes. You can't protect me from everything. Watch me try. His thumbs brushed away the moisture gathering at the corners of my eyes. I know this complicates things. I know it puts you in a difficult position. But Jodie, I can't keep my distance anymore. Not after seeing you hurt. Not when He stopped, swallowed hard. Not when I'm falling in love with you. The world tilted. You're what? Falling in love with you? He repeated. Clearer this time. Maybe I already have. I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe when you were sick and finally let me see past your walls. Maybe before that. But it's true, and I'm tired of pretending it isn't. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Cade, you don't have to say it back. He interrupted quickly. I'm not expecting that. I just needed you to know where I stand, what this means to me. Because if we're going to this, if we're going to be together, I need you to understand that I'm all in. Completely. No reservation. My hands came up to cover his, where they still cradled my face. I'm falling too, I whispered. So hard it scares me. Because I've never had anything good that lasted, and I keep waiting for this to fall apart. It won't. His forehead pressed against mine. I won't let it. We stood like that for a long moment, breathing together, letting the weight of what we just confessed settle between us. Then Cade pulled back slightly, his expression shifting to something more serious. We need to do this right. I'm gonna talk to HR, disclose our relationship officially. You'll be transferred to a different reporting structure so there's no conflict of interest. It might mean some lateral career moves for you in the short term. I don't care, I interrupted. As long as I get to keep you, I don't care about any of it. His smile was blinding. Then we're really doing this. Going public. We're really doing this. I confirmed, and suddenly I was smiling too, giddy with relief and possibility. Cade glanced at his watch. I have a meeting in 10 minutes that I absolutely cannot miss. But tonight, dinner at my place? We can talk about next steps. Figure out how to handle the office properly. I'd like that. He walked me to his office door. And just before opening it, he did something completely unexpected. He kissed my forehead, gentle and sweet and utterly public if anyone happened to be looking. No more hiding, he murmured against my skin. No more hiding, I agreed. That evening, as I sat in Cade's penthouse apartment overlooking the city, eating takeout and laughing at his terrible attempts to use chopsticks, I realized something profound. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. I had someone who saw me, really saw me, all my flaws and fears and fragile hopes, and wanted me anyway. What are you thinking about? Cade asked, catching me staring at him with what was probably a ridiculous expression. That I'm happy, I said simply, genuinely, terrifyingly happy. He set down his chopsticks and reached across the coffee table to take my hand. Good, because this is just the beginning for us. Everything else? We'll figure it out together. And looking into his eyes, seeing the absolute certainty there, I believed him. Whatever challenges came next, and there would be challenges, we'd face them together. No more hiding, no more pretending, just us, building something real. Finally, I'd found my home. Not a place, but a person. And I was never letting go.